This is a podcast on economic systems. The economic systems I will be covering are capitalism and communism. Capital and communism come about as an effect of the Industrial Revolution, and truly are a product of the Industrial Revolution in England during the 17 and 1800s. Capitalism. Capitalism was developed during the Enlightenment by a man named Adam Smith, and he talked about laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire is having your hands out of the economy. It was called the invisible hand. Some other kind of words for it are profit motive, free enterprise, and free market systems. The basic idea was if you worked really hard, you could get rich within the system, and that the government shouldn't interfere with your ability to grow and prosper. He wrote a book called Wealth of Nations, did Adam Smith, and he talked about that nations grow rich not by the government having their hand in the economy, but by the individual who is motivated by making money. That's where we get the term profit motive from. In a capitalist society, supply and demand determines what is made. Say it one more time. Supply and demand determines what is made. Therefore, if there is a demand for something like an iPhone, the company will produce more of them. It's not the government telling us what to produce. See the word capital in capitalism. The key word is to make money. That is what we do in a capitalist society. We make money. There's also this growing gap between the rich and the poor that take place because of capitalism. A perfect example is the Industrial Revolution in England, where people worked long hours, and some people actually began to question capitalism as a system because of the bad working conditions that took place. People had long hours, low pay, dangerous working conditions, child labor took place. They lived in the slums. Their family life was destroyed. So these are some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution. And if we keep going, okay, we see a kind of flattening out of the bottom class of citizens, that there was kind of a ceiling that they reached where no matter how long that they worked and how hard they worked, they weren't moving up the social ladder. So this is why people began to like a system like communism, where it offered equality into the system for everyone. Karl Marx is the father of communism. Also, alongside of him is Frederick Engels. They wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto. So in capitalism, we have Wealth of Nations. In communism, we have the Communist Manifesto. And what it said is there's this growing gap between the rich and the poor in society. And that the only way to attack this gap was basically to have a revolution. And Karl Marx saw history as this class struggle between two classes in society: the bourgeoisie, the people who had everything, the upper middle class and wealthy factory owners, and the proletariat, those who had nothing at all. Karl Marx saw the bourgeoisie growing wealthy off the backs of the proletariat. So he said the only way to deal with this was to have a revolution in which the proletariat overthrew the bourgeoisie. In his Communist Manifesto in 1848, he predicted that this would happen, that the proletariat would overthrow the bourgeoisie, and what we would see is a classless society. History is a class struggle, he always said. Workers of the world unite, from each according to his own ability to each according to his own need. So what Karl Marx was talking about was history being this class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and basically that the fact that there was this equality that should take place, and that the workers of the world should unite together, overthrow the bourgeoisie, and set up a classless society in which everyone was equal. He dreamed of this classless society in which the proletariat, or the working class, would control the means of production. So capital, things like money, factories, the business itself, and set up a classless society. He said there was no reason for government whatsoever, and this is kind of ironic because communism in theory isn't supposed to have a government, yet a communist system includes the government controlling every need of the people. He said government would eventually wither away, it wouldn't be there anymore. And it's ironic that you say that because actually communist or Marxist or socialist systems that we look at all indeed have that basic element to them where government has to control the needs of the people. He inspired quite a few people along the way. So if you are going to write about now a society which is communist, you'll look at Vladimir Lenin in Russia, Mao Zedong in China, Fidel Castro in Cuba, Ho Chi Minh in the 1960s in Vietnam, and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Okay? What I would suggest doing at this point is either going back to the communist revolution under Mao Zedong and see what you can come up with, or writing about Britain during the Industrial Revolution. Either or would prove pretty good, but you have to apply the system, so that's what we're going to be looking at. A great example of a communist system of government is run by Lenin and eventually Stalin in the Soviet Union. So we have to go back to the Russian Rev. Lenin came about with the ideas of Karl Marx, and he promises the people peace, land, and bread, a very simple process in Russia later to become the Soviet Union. The main idea was to get Russia out of World War I. It had been a disaster for them. They weren't industrialized. They were a backwards nation. They weren't ready for the modernizations that took place during World War I. So they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which ends World War I. Russia does lose land, but in the process is able to pull themselves out of the war, which makes World War I less of a problem, obviously, for the people of Russia. He promises land reform and an end to food shortages within the empire. What he said was, I'm going to take the land, redistribute it to the peasants so that everybody has a little bit, rather than everybody having nothing and the few having everything. It was his big idea, and it was extremely popular in Russia. Lenin changed what Marx said, though, a bit. Pure Marxism does not really happen. This is communist utopia. Marx believed that a working class would overthrow the bourgeoisie, that the people who were working in the factories. The problem was in Russia wasn't industrialized, so there is no working class. So he believed that the peasants would have to come about, and with the help of the Bolsheviks, this elite group of communists that was going to be smart and guide them, that they would be able to basically get back to a way of communism in society in which everybody was able to enjoy what they were doing. Lenin, like we said, when in charge, withdraws from the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and gives territory to Germany. He felt it was necessary to make peace with Germany at any price so he could deal with the enemies at home. What we're going to get in the home front is a civil war between the whites and the reds being the communists. We know it's the color of communism. And basically to set up a society. The entire Romanov dynasty is executed by firing squad in 1918. Okay? And basically what this ended the Tsarist rule of Russia and ended any chance of the Russian absolute monarchy of coming back into power. So Russia's absolute monarchy dies in 1918, and we get a new form of government that's going to come about, a new economic system, and that's going to be communism or a command economy. By 1921, this command economy is in complete effect in the Soviet Union. They are able to defeat the whites, which were those who were in support of the monarchy. And we know that Great Britain, France, and the United States sent troops to help the whites. Why? Because we didn't want communism to grow in Russia. We thought communism was an enemy of capitalism within the system. So basically, going against what Karl Marx says, it was the Communist Party, not the people, had power. So this Bolshevik party is going to be the ones who control Russia. They are the only legal party. Only its members can run for office. And they really used the secret police and military enforcement. Enemies or suspected enemies were killed. This is the basic system we see in Cuba, we see it in China, we see it in the Soviet Union, we see it in Russia before it becomes the Soviet Union. The brutality of a communist command system where the government is going to tell you how much to produce and what to produce. Okay, all banks, businesses were taken over by the Communist Party. It led to economic disaster. Why? Because under a communist system, it's not realistic. Although Lenin is going to put into effect his new economic policy. And this is big because, like Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, like Deng Xiaoping of China, he allows some private ownership. It's a mixed economy, and it does allow the economy to recover quite a bit. So what he is going to do is he's going to allow some private ownership of banks and businesses, and some private ownership of smaller things. But for the most part, as I said, the banks and the businesses, the big business, the foreign trade is going to be owned by the government. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is formed, the USSR, and there you can see the size of it and its independent nations that were a part of it. When Lenin dies, Stalin is going to take over, and Stalin is going to be the complete example of a communist system of government, where Lenin allowed elements of capitalism into a communist system. Joseph Stalin does not. He rules via terror and brutality. In the 1930s, he led great purges where he accused thousands of crimes against the government, and he put people in prison camps, he executed them. You even heard that he killed 6,000 people a month just by chance, just to keep people on their toes and wondering just exactly what was going to happen under his rule. It was a totalitarian system where one-party dictatorship rules over every aspect of the people's lives. That's what totalitarianism is. And that's what we see a lot of times in a command economy. Because in order for the government to tell you exactly what you have to produce, when you're going to produce it, how much it's going to cost, you need to have one person in complete control in order to have that. This is really going against what Karl Marx had said. He also believed in Russification, which was Russia was the most dominant nation in the Soviet Union. So everybody had to learn Russian. Everybody had to, the Russians were in charge of the government, the secret police, and he redrew boundaries to make sure that the non-Russians would not get the majority in the Soviet Union, because Russia was the main hub of the Soviet Union. This is similar to the Cultural Revolution, basically, that takes place under Mao Zedong. Under Stalin's command economy, government officials made all economic decisions. They controlled the factories, the businesses, the farms. He had a 5-year plan in which he wanted to produce more steel to modernize and industrialize his nation. Okay, like I just said, his heavy industry, increased oil, coal, steel, mining, military goods. The problem is there's a shortage on goods, okay, that are going to be necessary for farming and to produce food. And these goods are mass-produced at low quality, so no one wants to buy them. So the majority of the population is going to starve. He also believed in collectivization, which peasants had to give up farms and live on state-owned collectives. These are sometimes called communes. Those who refused were killed. So Stalin, you're going to see here, keywords: command economy, industrialization, because we want to industrialize the economy, and collectivization, peasants giving up to live on state farms, okay? Stalin's 5-year plan replaced the new economic policy of Lenin. So we had no more government allowing the people to make economic choices. Stalin was successful in industrializing Russia and strengthening the economy. However, millions are going to starve in the process, and millions are going to suffer under this totalitarian state of extreme censorship, where there's murder of political opponents, where people are tortured. Like we said, 6,000 people a month just killed to be killed, to keep people on their toes. This is what Stalin is going to do. And we can see by these pictures that peasants lived on collectives, okay? And this is where they were able to basically work together on farms or to mass produce steel and other goods, but there was no private ownership of land. Everything was done and ruled by the government. In the Ukraine, what we get is forced famine as a result. This is called the Black Death, where Stalin intentionally allowed millions of people to starve in the Ukraine. And he forced peasants to live on collectives, and government took all of their food. So therefore, they had nothing. And this is one of the ways he systematically eliminated people. Again, this is called the Black Famine in Ukraine. Stalin has a mixed legacy, and it's something we need to really consider. Was he a heroic leader or a brutal dictator? And that's something that we have to consider when we look at him. But we know that a command economy is a brutal economic system that brings with it terror and censorship. This is the end of the podcast on capitalism versus communism, and in particular, communism in the Soviet Union.